All right, what's up? Good morning, everybody. So I am sitting in a Burger King parking lot off of I-25 in the dark, but I'm under a street light, so I'm hoping everybody can see me okay. I'm also on my wife's phone, so we got all sorts of interesting variables going on this morning. But anyhow, I'm jumping in for Justin Dunaway. Justin and Morgan are getting away a little bit today, so I'm going to jump in, and I want to chat about some lessons from my dad. So over the past couple of weeks, for whatever reason, I've wound up sharing some pearls from my old man on Twitter because they've been really appropriate for conversations that have been going on. And I thought I would just pause here and maybe do an episode devoted to some of the things he taught me because, you know, a lot of people gain a lot of great business knowledge from books and from apprenticeships and from reading quotes and accumulating knowledge, and that's wonderful. I would say I learned all of it from my old man. So whatever I'm doing in business, however things are going forward, the vast majority of decisions that I make come from reflecting on things that my dad said or did over the years that have really been tried and true and that I saw firsthand and that I try to make him proud and incorporate every day. So little background on my dad to give you guys some relevance here. So my old man grew up in Detroit, on 9th Mile in Detroit. Very humble beginnings. His folks didn't have a whole lot of cash. They were getting by. They were in manufacturing in Detroit, getting by, but certainly working for everything they got. And no one in the family had ever went to college. And my dad was an exception to that. And so he wound up not only going to college, but actually wound up going to college and then moving out to Colorado and helping to grow a big engineering firm out in Colorado called Nolte, and then moving back to Upper Michigan. And actually, he passed away a couple years ago, but the month before he passed away, he was named president of one of the biggest engineering companies in Upper Michigan. And the reason why, I mean, number one, if you really understood my dad and a lot of his background, his story is extremely impressive, and it reminds me of something Tim Ferriss said a while back. I was listening to a Tim Ferriss episode, and he said, if you want to figure out how to hack life, or you want to figure out how to do something great, find people who are doing really well at things where they really shouldn't be. Right? So I think he was talking about bodybuilders at the time in strength and conditioning. And he was saying, you know, some people are just genetically gifted. It makes sense that they are going to do well in strength and conditioning and bodybuilding. But then there's some people who don't look the part. Some people who don't have the genetic backing who are still being successful. And it's really those people that you want to study, because the question is, how in the hell did that guy figure it out? You know, he or she didn't have the pedigree, didn't have the genetic advantages, didn't have the financial advantages, and yet they were able to be really successful. Those are the people that you can learn a ton from. And I really put my dad in that category. You know, coming from a family, growing up in downtown Detroit, just not having any extra money, not having a whole lot of guidance about higher education, kind of moving through the ranks and becoming what he became near the end of his life. And I'm going to share with you 5 things that I think guided him, that certainly I observed over the years and that I now try to follow. And the number one thing is the man was relentlessly optimistic, maybe to a fault, but he always believed that it could be done. And I see a few folks logging on from my area, and I'm hoping that some of the folks from Coleman catch this episode, because they'll be laughing their butts off. He never saw barriers. And he used to say, Jeffrey, it's not that I knew that we could do it. It's just that I didn't know that we couldn't do it, and I knew I wanted to. And that his behavior totally mirrored that comment. Like, he was never sure it could be done, but he was not sure they knew they couldn't do it, and he knew they wanted to do it, and so he always went for it. And as I look at his life, just the idea of him going to college was pretty bizarre. But again, the fact that just not seeing the barriers, right? And once he recognizes, well, it's not impossible, well, then I'm going to step on the gas. The same thing with moving out west. You know, none of my family lived out there, and here the old man packs up the rig and drives out to Colorado because he was drawn to it and tried to make it happen out here. Just this relentless optimism that carried all the way into Coleman Engineering. And I laugh all the time talking to John Garsky, who was my dad's boss when he was kind of working his way up. And my dad always being a pain in the ass for John. And John is still laughing about that to this day, that the guy always dreamed big. and always gave it 140%, even when they only had 90% in the bank. So the number one thing, and I see a lot of that being reflected in quotes and in a no-fear kind of lifestyle, but my dad really embodied that if he didn't know it was impossible, then it was possible. And if they wanted to do it, they were going to swing for the fences. And so number one, he was relentlessly optimistic. Number two, my dad valued knowledge without hierarchy. So I'll tell you a story I remember very vividly. So I worked alongside my dad for a short time. My dad was a land surveyor, so that was what he did by trade. And so I worked alongside him for a short time in Michigan. So I actually went out on jobs with him, and we surveyed property. And this particular day, we were surveying a piece of land up on M95, a small town called Republic. Those of you from my neck of the woods will be familiar. Very small town on the way to Marquette, Michigan. And we had lunch with one of the local surveyors there. Now, Republic is, to put it mildly, a very rural town. I live in a very rural area. This is a very rural town in a very rural area. So population probably a couple hundred folks. And my dad at this point was a supervisor and had, a little bit of status inside of the company. And we had lunch with one of the land surveyors in Republic. And I just remember how incredibly engaged my dad was in what this guy was telling my dad about the lay of the land of the area. And my dad just showed this guy such a tremendous amount of respect, and my dad always acted like that. So it was really not out of the ordinary. But what caught me off guard was the next day, we had to travel and meet with the director of MDOT, the Department of Transportation over in Minneapolis. So we actually had to drive over to Minneapolis. Now, this guy's a big wig. My dad would have called him heavy breathers. A big corporate guy. And what was amazing to me was I could not tell the difference in my dad's disposition when he talked to the leader of the Department of Transportation versus when he talked to the land surveyor in Republic, Michigan. And I remember driving back from Minneapolis, and I brought this to my dad's attention. I said, Dad, it seems like I was nervous talking to the big wig, and I wasn't nervous talking to the other guy, but you didn't seem to act any differently in any way, shape, or form. You gave them both the exact same amount of respect, and you literally and earnestly seemed just as eager to learn from both of them. And my dad said, Jeff, the funny thing about it is, in most cases, people have the same amount of knowledge. It's just in areas the public values differently, but I don't value them differently. He said usually the knowledge that a land surveyor in a small town of Republic would have is going to wind up being every bit as relevant to you doing a great job as the knowledge of the director of the Department of Transportation. And my dad legitimately believed that. And it was amazing to watch him interact with people. And my dad, at the end of days, knew some fairly important people. But you could never tell the difference who he was talking to because he was just as interested regardless of what kind of knowledge you had. He knew that your knowledge was just as valuable, whether other people valued it more or not. He didn't. And watching that desire to learn from everybody, I think is one of the things that really made him unique. And the reason he was able to grow so fast in his life and in his company was that he did not have that filter towards knowledge. If you had it, he wanted it. And he didn't value yours any better than the guy living in the big house up the street. So that was always one thing that really amazed me about my dad. And one thing that I think if we can all take something away from that. That regardless of how other people value knowledge, knowledge is knowledge. And if you value people and you value humans and you know that they have something important to share and their life experience is unique and you can engage with folks like that, you're just on a different kind of playing field than someone who's always weighing and judging and giving different amounts of their attention to people who they believe are different levels of importance. My dad never saw importance. He just saw people and he thought all people were important. And he carried himself like that. And because he did, it grew a lot of affection and a lot of trust and allowed him to do things that other folks probably couldn't have gotten away with. So that was number two. He valued knowledge, but he valued it without any level of hierarchy. Number three, the man was always early. So no matter what he was doing, no matter what the meeting was, and again, this goes right back to to point number two. It didn't matter if you were the head of the Department of Transportation. It didn't matter if you were an assistant on a small surveying crew in Republic. If you had a meeting with my old man, he was there 10 minutes early. And he always told me, he said, Jeff, you can either tell people they are important or you can show them they're important. And I promise you the latter is more meaningful. And my dad always believed the best way to show people they were important was to be early. right? Because nothing says that you don't value someone's time as much as yours than showing up 5 minutes late. There were very few times that my dad was rattled. He was a very cool, calm, collected guy. Focused guy, but didn't get rattled very often. But good Lord, if that man was running 5 minutes late, you did not want to be around him. And again, it didn't matter if you were going to a swanky meeting or you were going to meet a guy holding the rod for a small group in a small town. It mattered every bit the same to my dad that you showed that respect and you were 15 minutes early. I will never forget, you guys. I walked in one of the first days working alongside my dad in the company. I started work at 6 a.m. I walk in at 5 to 6. I thought that was pretty good. You know, I roll in a couple minutes early. And my dad says, Jeff, where you been? And I said, Dad, I start at 6. And he said, yeah, it's 6. And I said, yeah, I start at 6. And he said, if that's the way you want to take it, why don't you go ahead and take the day off? And maybe next time you can show up a bit early for the guys who've been on the crew for a while. You can fire the trucks up and get us ready before the official start time. And that was a really good lesson for me, and it was a really good representation of the way that my dad served other people. You know, served his staff, served those that he worked with. He showed you that respect, and if you didn't have that respect, I can promise you, you lost some of his. So the old man was always early. And I love that saying of, you can either tell people they're important or you can show them they're important. And being punctual and being timely is undeniably the best way you can show someone, I deeply value your time, I deeply value your knowledge, and I deeply value our relationship. And I'll be damned if you're going to be sitting at a restaurant for me for 5 or 10 minutes. I know you don't have that time, and you're not going to waste that time on me. So that he held to that. I literally don't think in all the years I ever spent time with that guy, I don't think he was ever late once. So that was lesson number 3. So we've got relentlessly optimistic, the value of knowledge without hierarchy, and being on time, right? Number 4, he knew how and when to over-deliver. So as I watched some of the almost uncanny level of success that my dad had in business, I really started to wonder what the key things that he was doing were that separated him and his group, that allowed them to take kind of a rinky-dink little operation and grow it into a very serious corporation with a bunch of amazing leaders and great people. And how did those guys pull that off? And one thing I learned from my dad was he knew when to over-deliver. So he knew when to read a situation and realize if we really over-deliver right now, the ROI on this is going to be gigantic. And I learned over the years he was reading a lot of variables there. You know, looking at different relationships and knowing when he had an opportunity with his team to really, really over-deliver, that it would carry forward and be exponential in the development of what they were trying to accomplish. And one thing he would routinely do in the case of over-delivery is he would show up in person. So my dad only passed away a couple years ago. So, you know, cell phones and virtual meetings were certainly a big part of the corporate life and were certainly acceptable and considered acceptable. But there were so many times when my dad would get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and drive to Minneapolis for a half-hour meeting. And I would say, Dad, why would you do that? Like, it's a 5-hour drive both ways. You're going to spend 10 hours on the road in the middle of winter in the northern Midwest to meet with a guy for 25 minutes over coffee? And he would say, Jeffrey, this one's important, right? And he knew in which cases being there face to face was important. He knew when he had to ask his team, guys, we got to really step on the gas. Like, I'm gonna burn you here for a couple of weeks. Like, we're gonna be working double shift. And the key was his team believed in him and his asks were selective. So when you have a boss who's always riding you, when they say, hey, we have to step it up, in your mind, you're kind of thinking, yeah, man, what I really want to do is give you the finger, you know, because you're always saying that, because we're on a constant wheel, a corporate wheel to try to burn us out and create profit. But my dad always did a great job of backing off when he could and respecting employees, families, and relationships, so that when he said, you know what, you guys, if we step on it right now, we're not going to regret it. We're going to reap the rewards, and we're going to share those rewards. And when he did, he was right. And when he was right, everybody benefited. benefited. And because there was so much trust involved, because of the way he managed relationships, his team backed him up when he said, okay, we got to go double time. And he always chose the right moments to go double time. So when I look back at when they stepped on it and who those relationships were with and how much they paid off down the road, I am consistently just amazed by my dad's ability to navigate and read those relationships, know when to over-deliver, and then be able to have his team behind him when he did. So knowing when to over-deliver and knowing how to do it was a huge one. The fifth and final one was the guy maintained relationships like no one I've ever met in my life. So at my dad's funeral a couple years ago, we were overwhelmed. First of all, we were overwhelmed by the amount of people that my dad had a huge impact on. So my dad's death was sudden, it was unexpected, and there was just this... There was lines out the door. It was hours and hours of folks trying to come there and pay their respect. It was really something to behold. And the stories they would come up and share with my brother and I and my sister, and they were appalling. They were amazing. They made me respect my dad more than I ever thought I could. And I already respected the guy about as much as one human being can respect another. But people would say, guys, one thing you have to realize about your dad is how much he cared deeply about all of us. And they would tell stories of my old man would be on a trip in Lower Michigan in the middle of winter, 10 p.m., going to a job. And he would call a guy that he had a relationship with 10, 12 years ago and say, hey, Butch, I'm driving through. Can we get a bite to eat? And people would say, Jeff, I could not believe your dad remembered me. Like, this was years ago. And what was so cool about it was there was no financial gain there for my old man, right? The relationship was well by and gone. A lot of these folks had retired years ago. So my dad was not reaching out to further a business relationship. He was reaching out because he really cared. And that was the type of authenticity that drove my dad's life, and I think ultimately drove his business. And these people would shake their head and say, Jeff, he remembered everything about me. You know, he remembered all the jobs we did, and we laughed and drank coffee, and it was just really special. And all these people are saying that. And my brother and sister and I are walking away like, how did Dad do this? Like, how did he maintain all of these relationships in all these different spots across the country, everywhere he lived, and all these people still wanted to meet up with him and wanted to have dinner? And guys, the bottom line was the guy cared about people. I mean, he really cared. Whether it was about being early, whether it was about valuing knowledge, whether it was about continuing his relationship way beyond when it had any business interest to do so, it was all about something bigger, and that something bigger was really caring. And that's why the funeral was packed, and that's why people were shaking their head telling stories, because this was a human being who other people mattered more than himself. It's why he always made sure to be there. It's why he paved the way for so many coming behind him. And those are the lessons that I've learned from watching one of the greatest people I've ever known navigate business and relationships in the way they were always meant to be navigated. And that explains the truly uncanny level of success that he had, considering where he came from, downtown Detroit, growing up in a family that those kind of business aspirations really weren't something that ever would have been talked about around the dinner table. So for what it's worth, be optimistic. Right? Value knowledge and don't have a hierarchy, right? Get there early, right? Know when to over-deliver and value relationships. You know, as opposed to sharing little trinkets on Twitter, I guess I want to tell you the whole story, and I hope it's meaningful for some of you, and I really hope all of you have somebody in your life, like I had in my life, that has guided me not only while they were there, but will guide me way after he's gone. And I will sit here, all these roads I drive, I'm sitting here, it's pitch black out here, driving 25, thinking about the company, and all the decisions that I make, and all the decisions we're making as a group, they're so guided by just somebody who blazed a trail of authenticity. And I sure hope everybody has that, and I sure feel thankful that I do. I guess around the holidays, I feel especially thankful. So thanks for joining me this morning. I hope there's some value there. Always happy to chat more about my dad and share stories. He sure meant the world to me and still does. So everybody have a really amazing day after Christmas. I hope the holiday was great. I might catch you again on Thursday, or maybe Alan will jump on. We'll see what happens. Take care, everybody. Thank you.